This forecast is airtight, Vanessa announced to the partners, her hand resting on my presentation deck, now with her name on the cover. My throat tightened, but I stayed silent. Harrison, the managing partner, leaned forward, his reading glasses catching the conference room light. Who built this model? Timothy, our junior analyst, pulled up the file properties on his laptop. His face went pale. Sophia, the room fell silent. Then Harrison's voice cut through the tension. My office, now. Some betrayals happen in the shadows. Others unfold in boardrooms with 20 witnesses. Welcome to the Payback Office channel, where workplace justice isn't just a fantasy, it's a documented reality. If stories of professional karma resonate with the part of you that believes merit should matter, hitting that subscribe button helps build this community. We're climbing toward 8,000 subscribers, and every addition strengthens the message that integrity still counts in the corporate world. My name is Sophia Castellano, Senior Financial Analyst at Brennan and Cole Investment Firm in Manhattan. My parents ran a family restaurant in Queens, the kind of place where you learn that hard work has a face, where empathy isn't optional, and where your word is the only collateral that truly matters. Those lessons came with me into the glass towers of Wall Street. The model that started everything took me 6 weeks to build. 6 weeks of 14-hour days, of stress-testing variables until my eyes blurred, of triple-checking every assumption because in our world, a single decimal point could mean millions. We'd been hired by Westridge Pharmaceuticals to forecast the market impact of their new immunotherapy drug. The contract was worth $2.3 million to our firm, the kind of project that made or broke careers. Harrison had assigned me as the lead modeler, with Vanessa Thornton handling client relations. On paper, it was a fair division of labor. In practice, it meant I did the intellectual heavy lifting while Vanessa schmoozed over cocktails and took credit for team efforts. I'd accepted this dynamic for 3 years. Vanessa had connections, old money, the right prep school, a last name that opened doors I didn't even know existed. I had a degree from a state school and a work ethic that could outlast anyone's pedigree. The forecast model I created was unlike anything our firm had produced before. I didn't just project revenue streams. I built a dynamic ecosystem that accounted for regulatory approval timelines, competitive drug launches, insurance reimbursement negotiations, and even public sentiment analysis based on social media trends around pharmaceutical pricing. I integrated machine learning algorithms to adjust projections based on real-time data feeds. The model could recalibrate itself as new information emerged, giving Westridge an actual strategic tool rather than a static PowerPoint deck they'd present once and forget. It was, without false modesty, brilliant. I finished it on a Tuesday night at 11:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I'd been working for 19 straight hours, and when I finally hit save, the timestamp felt like a small victory. I backed up the files to our secure server, sent Vanessa a summary email, and went home to my studio apartment where I collapsed still wearing my work clothes. The presentation to Westridge was scheduled for Thursday morning. Wednesday afternoon, Vanessa stopped by my cubicle with 2 overpriced lattes, her usual tactic when she wanted something. "The deck looks incredible," she said, perching on the edge of my desk. "Harrison's going to lose his mind when he sees what we've built." That pronoun always carried extra weight when Vanessa used it. "I need you to walk me through the technical sections," she continued. "The partners want me to present, and I need to sound fluent in the methodology." This was normal. Vanessa presented, I prepped her. The talent stayed in the back office while the pedigree worked the room. I spent 4 hours that afternoon coaching her through every component of the model. She took meticulous notes, asked surprisingly sharp questions, and even seemed genuinely impressed by some of the more innovative elements. "You should really be the one presenting this," she said at one point. I'd laughed. Harrison would never go for it. Client-facing is your territory. "Maybe it's time that changed," Vanessa had said, and something in her tone made me look up. Her expression was unreadable. That should have been my first warning. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that makes Manhattan feel almost magical. I wore my best suit, a charcoal gray Theory number I'd bought on sale, and arrived at the office at 6:30 a.m. to run final checks on the presentation laptop. The Westridge team was scheduled to arrive at 9 o'clock. At 8:45, Harrison gathered our presentation team in the main conference room, himself, Vanessa, Timothy from Analytics, and me. "This is the biggest pitch we've had all year," Harrison said, his silver hair impeccably styled as always. "Vanessa, you'll lead. Sophia, you're on standby for technical questions. Timothy, you're handling the logistics deck. I'll close with the contract terms." Standard protocol. I nodded, my printed notes organized in a leather portfolio my mother had given me when I made senior analyst. The Westridge executives arrived exactly on time. Their CEO, Dr. Graham Whitmore, their CFO, Leslie Park, and their VP of Strategy, James Hendricks. All of them radiated the particular confidence that comes from having a breakthrough product and knowing it. Harrison handled the introductions, positioning Vanessa as our lead strategist on the pharmaceutical sector. I was introduced as our senior analyst, which was technically accurate if strategically diminishing. Then Vanessa began the presentation. For the first 20 minutes, everything proceeded exactly as rehearsed. She walked through the executive summary, the market landscape, the competitive analysis. Her delivery was polished, confident, effortlessly charming. Then we reached the section on the forecast model, my forecast model, and something shifted. Vanessa didn't just present my work. She presented it with the fluency of someone who'd conceived every element, adding contextual insights I'd never shared because I'd never thought of them. She fielded technical questions from Dr. Whitmore with sophisticated answers that went beyond what I'd coached her on. She'd actually understood the model, not just memorized my talking points, genuinely understood the underlying methodology. Dr. Whitmore was leaning forward, engaged in a way that clients rarely were during technical sections. "This adaptive recalibration feature," he said, pointing to one of my algorithms. "Most forecasts we see are dead on arrival because they can't account for market volatility. This actually evolves." "Exactly," Vanessa responded smoothly. "Static models are expensive paperweights. This is a strategic instrument." Leslie Park, the CFO, pulled out her phone and started typing notes. "What's the confidence interval on your 18-month projection?" 94%, with a margin of error of plus or minus 3.2%, Vanessa answered without hesitation. "The model runs 10,000 Monte Carlo simulations across the variable sets, so the confidence bands are genuinely robust, not aspirational." I felt a strange cocktail of emotions: pride that my work was landing so powerfully, irritation that Vanessa was receiving the credit, and something else, a growing unease I couldn't quite name. Then Vanessa advanced to a slide I'd never seen before. It was my model, my exact model, but the analysis had been extended. She'd added a section on international market expansion, projecting revenue streams across European and Asian markets with the same sophisticated methodology I'd built for the US forecast. She'd continued my work without telling me, and she'd done it well. Dr. Whitmore actually stood up to get a closer look at the international projections on the screen. "This is exactly what our board has been asking for," he said. "Every consultant we've hired has given us US-focused analysis and then slapped together some half-baked international addendum. This is integrated from the ground up." Harrison caught my eye, his expression carefully neutral, but I could read the subtext. This was exceeding expectations. This was going to close. James Hendricks, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. "Walk me through your regulatory assumption for the EU approval timeline. That's where most models fall apart." Vanessa didn't miss a beat. "The model accounts for the EMA's Adaptive Pathways program, which for breakthrough therapies like yours can run parallel to FDA approval rather than sequential. I've built in a probability tree that accounts for 3 scenarios: simultaneous approval, 6-month lag, and 12-month lag, weighted by historical data from comparable immunotherapy drugs in the past 5 years." That was my methodology exactly, except I'd only applied it to the US regulatory environment. Vanessa had extrapolated it to international frameworks and apparently done so correctly based on Hendrix's approving nod. The presentation concluded to genuine applause. Dr. Whitmore shook Harrison's hand with the kind of enthusiasm that meant a signed contract was imminent. "I have to ask," Dr. Whitmore said, turning to Vanessa, "who built this model, because we'd like to bring them in as a consultant during implementation." My breath caught. This was it, the moment where my work would be properly attributed, where my name would attach to my creation. Vanessa smiled with perfect humility. "I developed the core methodology," she said. "Sophia here handled a lot of the data processing and model construction. It was definitely a team effort." A team effort, with her as the architect and me as the data entry specialist. Harrison jumped in smoothly. "We'd be happy to discuss a consulting arrangement. Vanessa's pharmaceutical expertise is exactly what you'd need for implementation." The meeting adjourned with handshakes and promises to have contracts drafted by end of week. The Westridge team departed energized, already talking about presenting the forecast to their board. As soon as the conference room door closed behind them, Harrison turned to our team with a rare smile. "Outstanding work," he said. "Vanessa, that international expansion section, that was above and beyond scope. That's the kind of initiative that sets you apart." "Thank you," Vanessa said graciously, though I really did have strong support from the team. Generic, vague, designed to sound collaborative while claiming the spotlight. Harrison turned to me. "Sophia, solid execution on the data work. Your attention to detail continues to be an asset." Data work, detail, the vocabulary of support staff, not strategic thinkers. I smiled and nodded because that's what you do when a managing partner compliments you, even when the compliment is actually a diminishment. Timothy shot me a sympathetic look as we filed out of the conference room. He was 24, fresh out of undergrad, but he'd worked closely enough with me on the model to know exactly whose intellectual property had just been repackaged. I went back to my cubicle and tried to focus on other projects, but my hands were shaking. 3 years of accepting crumbs, of telling myself that good work would eventually be recognized, of believing that meritocracy might be delayed but not denied, all of it felt suddenly, crushingly naive. At 4:30 p.m., my phone buzzed with a calendar invitation. "Leadership team meeting, tomorrow 10 a.m. conference room A." The attendees list included all the partners and senior leadership, and Vanessa. I wasn't on the list. Something cold settled in my chest. Leadership team meetings weren't regular occurrences. They happened when someone was being promoted, when major deals were being announced, when the firm's direction was being set. I opened my laptop and navigated to our shared server, pulling up the folder containing the Westridge forecast model. I opened the file properties, looking for the metadata that would show creation date, modification history, authorship. The file showed Vanessa as the author. Creation date, Wednesday, 6:47 p.m. The day before the presentation, hours after I'd finished coaching her. My actual model, the one I'd uploaded Tuesday night, was gone from the main project folder. I searched the server frantically, finally finding my original files in an archived subfolder, the kind of place where obsolete drafts go to die. Someone had replaced my file with a duplicate, changed the authorship metadata, and buried my original. This wasn't just taking credit for a team effort. This was premeditated theft. I sat in my cubicle as the office slowly emptied around me, the Manhattan skyline turning gold with sunset, and made a decision. I wasn't going to send a scorched earth email. I wasn't going to confront Vanessa in some dramatic hallway showdown. I was going to document everything, and I was going to wait for the right moment. That moment came faster than I expected. Friday morning, I arrived early and printed every email I'd sent Vanessa about the model. I made copies of my original files, complete with timestamps. I created a PDF of the file properties showing my authorship and the suspicious timing of her version. At 9:45 a.m., I watched from my cubicle as Vanessa walked toward conference room A, carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The leadership meeting ran long. I tracked the time obsessively. 10 o'clock became 11 o'clock, then 11:30. Finally, at 11:47, that number again, the conference room door opened. Vanessa emerged first, her face flushed with what looked like excitement. Harrison followed, along with the other partners, their expressions pleased. My phone buzzed, an all-staff email from Harrison. Please join me in congratulating Vanessa Thornton on her promotion to principal. Vanessa's exceptional work on the Westridge engagement demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking and client leadership that defines our firm's values. Her promotion is effective immediately. Principal, a title that came with a $200,000 base salary, equity stake, and a clear path to partner. My vision blurred. The documentation I'd so carefully prepared felt suddenly pointless. What was I going to do? File a complaint that I hadn't been properly credited, while Vanessa was being celebrated as the firm's rising star. I was nobody, she was now a principal. The power differential had just become a canyon. I made it to the bathroom before anyone could see me cry. Locked in a stall, I let myself have exactly 5 minutes of despair. Then I washed my face, fixed my makeup, and went back to my desk. But Harrison hadn't become managing partner by being oblivious. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that during that leadership meeting, something had triggered his instincts. Vanessa had been presenting her case for promotion, walking the partners through her contributions to the Westridge engagement. She'd pulled up the model on the conference room screen, explaining the methodology with confident fluency. Douglas Park, one of the senior partners, had asked a specific technical question about the machine learning algorithms, how they weighted different variables in the recalibration process. Vanessa had hesitated, just for a second, but long enough that Harrison noticed. She'd recovered quickly, giving an answer that sounded sophisticated, but was actually somewhat generic. Harrison had spent 30 years evaluating people, and he knew the difference between someone who'd built something and someone who'd learned to talk about it convincingly. After the meeting, he'd gone back to his office and done something he rarely did. He'd personally reviewed the project files. The timestamp on Vanessa's version had jumped out immediately. Wednesday at 6:47 p.m., less than 15 hours before a major client presentation. That wasn't how complex analytical models got built. That was when final presentations got polished, not when original work got created. Harrison had pulled up the archived folders and found my original files. Tuesday at 11:47 p.m. 6 weeks of incremental updates before that, all authored by me. He'd checked the email trails, my messages to Vanessa, walking her through every component, her requests for clarification, for coaching, for explanations of methodology. Then he'd called Timothy into his office. The Westridge model, Harrison had said without preamble, who built it? Timothy had gone pale, clearly calculating the political risk of answering honestly. But he was 24 and hadn't yet learned to lie smoothly to managing partners. Sophia built the entire thing, he'd said. I helped with some of the data collection, but the methodology, the algorithms, the structure, that was all her. She worked on it for 6 weeks straight. And the international expansion section. I don't know about that part, Timothy admitted. That wasn't in any of the versions Sophia showed me during development. Harrison had thanked him and sent him back to work. Then he'd spent another hour reviewing Vanessa's previous work product, looking for evidence of the kind of sophisticated analytical capability the Westridge model demonstrated. He hadn't found it. Vanessa's strengths were in client relationships, in presentation, in synthesis. She'd never produced original analytical work at this level. The conclusion was inescapable. Vanessa had stolen Sophia's work, added a section to make it look like she'd expanded on a collaborative foundation, and had nearly gotten away with it. Harrison had sat in his office, looking out at the Manhattan skyline, and felt something he rarely experienced: genuine anger. He'd built Brennan and Cole on a reputation for integrity. Clients trusted them because their work was solid, their insights were genuine, and their people were credible. Vanessa had jeopardized all of that. Worse, She'd done it by stealing from someone who embodied exactly the kind of meritocratic excellence the firm claimed to value. And he'd nearly rewarded her for it. The promotion to principal had already been announced. He couldn't reverse it immediately without explaining why, which would embarrass the firm and potentially expose them to legal risk if Vanessa decided to fight back. But he could investigate further, document everything, and confront her with evidence she couldn't deny. That's when he decided to call me into his office. An hour after Vanessa's promotion was announced, my phone rang. Internal extension, Harrison's office. My stomach dropped. Was I being fired? Had Vanessa somehow preemptively complained that I was being difficult about the team dynamic? I walked to Harrison's corner office, each step feeling like walking toward an executioner. His assistant waved me in. Harrison was standing at his window, looking out at the midtown skyline. "Close the door," he said without turning around. I closed it, my heart hammering. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "Of course." "Who built the Westridge forecast model?" The question hung in the air between us. This was the moment. The choice between self-preservation and truth, between keeping my head down and speaking up. The silence in Harrison's office felt heavy enough to crush me. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, I could see the Chrysler Building catching the late morning sun, indifferent and eternal while my career hung in the balance. "I did," I said quietly. "I built the entire model from the ground up. The adaptive algorithms, the Monte Carlo simulations, the regulatory probability trees, all of it." Harrison's face remained perfectly neutral, the kind of expression developed over decades of high-stakes negotiations. "And the international expansion section that Vanessa presented." "I never saw it before the presentation," I answered. "She must have built it Wednesday night after I spent the afternoon coaching her through my methodology." "Can you prove what you're telling me?" This was the question everything hinged on. I'd been at the firm long enough to know that accusations without evidence were career suicide. "Yes," I said. "I have the original files with creation timestamps, email chains showing my process, and the file properties showing when my work was replaced with a duplicate under her authorship." Harrison gestured to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Sit, show me everything." I pulled out my phone and walked him through the documentation I'd compiled. The emails I'd sent Vanessa with model updates. The file properties showing I'd created the original model. The server logs showing when my files had been moved to an archive folder and replaced with her version. Harrison examined everything with the methodical attention of someone who'd built a career on catching discrepancies in financial statements. His expression remained neutral, but I noticed his jaw tighten when he saw the timestamp on Vanessa's file, created hours after our coaching session. "I had my suspicions," Harrison said finally. "During the leadership meeting this morning, Vanessa presented well, but when Douglas asked her a detailed technical question about the machine learning algorithms, she hesitated. She recovered, but the answer was generic. Someone who'd actually built those algorithms wouldn't have hesitated." He leaned back in his chair. "That's when I started looking at the files myself. The timestamps told a story that didn't match her narrative, so did the email trails. And when I asked Timothy who built the model, he confirmed what I was already beginning to suspect." Relief flooded through me so intensely I felt dizzy. He'd already been investigating. My documentation wasn't a desperate accusation, it was confirmation of what he'd already started to uncover. "Why didn't you say something during the presentation?" Harrison asked. "When Whitmore asked who built the model, you stayed silent." It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself. "Because I've been here long enough to know how these things work," I said carefully. "Vanessa handles client relationships, I'm the technical resource." Speaking up in that moment would have looked like I was undermining the firm in front of a major client. Harrison leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "And you thought staying silent was the better option?" "I thought it was the safer option," I corrected. "Better? No, but I've watched what happens to people who make waves. They don't get promoted. They get managed out." Something flickered across Harrison's face, not quite agreement, but acknowledgement. He'd been in this business long enough to know I wasn't wrong. "Send me all of this documentation," he said finally. "Every file, every email, every piece of evidence." And Sophia, not a word about this conversation to anyone, understood. I understood perfectly. He was either going to address the theft or bury me for reporting it, and I wouldn't know which until it was too late to protect myself. I went back to my desk and sent Harrison an encrypted email with everything I had. Then I updated my resume and started reaching out to recruiters, because I'd learned a long time ago that hope wasn't a strategy. The weekend passed in a fog of anxiety. Monday morning arrived with rain that matched my mood: cold, gray, relentless. I was at my desk by 7:15 a.m., going through the motions of productivity while obsessively checking my email. Nothing from Harrison, nothing from HR, nothing to indicate whether my entire career was about to implode. At 9:30, Timothy appeared at my cubicle, his face pale. "Leadership meeting," he whispered. "Conference room A right now, you're invited." My stomach dropped. Did they say why? No, but Vanessa just got called in too, and she looks like she's about to throw up. I grabbed my notebook and followed Timothy down the hall, my legs feeling disconnected from my body. The conference room door was open. Inside, all 5 partners were seated along one side of the table, Harrison in the center, flanked by Monica Reeves, our head of compliance, and the 3 other managing partners, Douglas Park, Simone Baptiste, and Keith Yamamoto. This was not a good sign. The full partnership only assembled for serious situations: major deals, major wins, or major problems. Vanessa was already seated on the opposite side of the table, her usual confidence visibly shaken. I took a seat 2 chairs down from her, maintaining distance. Harrison waited until the door closed before speaking. "Thank you both for joining us. This meeting concerns the Westridge Pharmaceuticals engagement and specifically the forecast model that was presented last Thursday." Vanessa's hands were folded on the table in front of her, knuckles white. Harrison continued, his tone carefully neutral. "I've spent the weekend reviewing the development history of that model, including file metadata, email communications, and server logs. I've also consulted with our IT director to verify the authenticity of those records." He opened a folder and pulled out printed documentation, my documentation. "The evidence clearly shows that Sofia Castellano created the core forecast model in its entirety over a 6-week period ending Tuesday, October 17th. Vanessa Thornton created a duplicate file on Wednesday, October 18th, changed the authorship metadata, archived Sophia's original work, and added the international expansion section." The room was silent, except for the rain against the windows. Harrison looked directly at Vanessa. "Do you dispute any of these facts?" Vanessa's voice was barely above a whisper. "No." "During Thursday's presentation," Harrison continued, "when Dr. Whitmore asked who built the model, you claimed to have developed the core methodology while crediting Sophia with data processing and model construction. That characterization was materially false. Do you dispute this?" "No," Vanessa repeated, her voice breaking slightly. Monica Reeves spoke up, her tone sharp. "You also accepted a promotion to principal based primarily on the strength of work you didn't create. Were you planning to disclose the actual authorship at any point?" Vanessa's carefully constructed composure crumbled. It started as just wanting to understand Sophia's work better, so I could present it more effectively. But when I started extending the model to international markets, and it actually worked, I thought if I could show I understood the methodology well enough to expand it, that proved I had contributed something substantive. By stealing someone else's intellectual property and passing it off as your own. Douglas Park's voice carried the kind of cold anger that was somehow more frightening than shouting. "I didn't think of it as stealing," Vanessa said desperately. "We're a team. The firm owns the work product, I thought." "You thought wrong," Harrison interrupted. "The firm owns the client deliverables, yes, but internal attribution, credit, and compensation are based on individual contribution. You deliberately misrepresented your role to the partners, to the client, and by extension, to the entire firm. Simone Baptiste, who rarely spoke in meetings, leaned forward. Did you create the duplicate file and change the metadata yourself, or did you have technical help? A new tension entered the room. If Vanessa had recruited someone from IT to help her commit fraud, this was about to get much worse. I did it myself, Vanessa said quickly. I found a tutorial online about editing file properties. Nobody else was involved. Small mercies. At least the conspiracy was limited to one person. Keith Yamamoto looked at me for the first time since the meeting began. Sophia, why didn't you speak up during the client presentation when your work was being misattributed? The same question Harrison had asked, now in front of the full partnership. My answer would matter. Because I believed that protecting the client relationship and the firm's reputation in that moment was more important than protecting my ego, I said carefully. Contradicting Vanessa in front of Westridge would have damaged our credibility and potentially cost us the engagement. I chose to wait and address it internally afterward. Monica Reeves nodded slowly. And when you did address it internally, you brought documentation rather than accusations. You handled this correctly. Harrison closed the folder in front of him. Vanessa, your promotion to principal is rescinded effective immediately. Additionally, you're being placed on a performance improvement plan with a 90-day evaluation period. During that time, you'll be removed from all client-facing responsibilities and reassigned to internal projects under direct partner supervision. Vanessa's face had gone from pale to gray. A performance improvement plan was corporate speak for start looking for a new job because you're about to be fired. You should understand, Harrison continued, that the only reason you're not being terminated immediately is because the international expansion work you added to the model was technically sound and demonstrated genuine analytical capability. That shows you have skills beyond plagiarism. Whether you have the character to rebuild trust here is an open question. He turned to me. Sophia, effective immediately, you're promoted to principal. Your compensation will be adjusted to reflect the standard principal salary structure, and you'll be assigned as the primary consultant on the Westridge implementation project. Additionally, you'll receive the full bonus allocation for the Westridge engagement, which would have been split with Vanessa under the original arrangement. The words took a moment to register. Principal, the promotion I'd been working toward for 3 years, achieved not through politics or connections, but through undeniable evidence of merit. Thank you, I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. Harrison wasn't finished. I also want to acknowledge that you were put in an impossible position. You did exceptional work, had it stolen, and stayed professional throughout. That kind of integrity is exactly what we claim to value as a firm. I'm sorry we didn't see what was happening until you had to bring it to our attention. A managing partner apologizing to a senior analyst, now principal, was unprecedented. The other partners nodded in agreement, and I realized this meeting was as much about setting a cultural standard as it was about addressing a specific incident. We're also implementing new protocols for project attribution, Monica Reeves added. Going forward, all analytical models will have embedded digital signatures that can't be altered without creating an audit trail. This shouldn't have happened, and we're putting systems in place to ensure it doesn't happen again. The meeting adjourned shortly after. Vanessa left quickly, her head down, avoiding eye contact. I stayed behind at Harrison's request. Once the room cleared, his corporate formality softened slightly. The Westridge team is coming in Wednesday for an implementation kickoff. They specifically requested the person who built the model. I told them that would be you. What did you tell them about the change? That Vanessa is being reassigned to other projects, and you'll be taking lead on their account going forward, Harrison said. They don't need to know the internal drama. But Sophia, when Whitmore asks you technical questions, don't hold back. You've been hiding your light under a bushel for too long. Hiding my light under a bushel. My grandmother used to say the same thing, usually while pressing another helping of pasta on me and telling me I worked too hard for people who didn't appreciate me. I went back to my desk, soon to be an actual office, I realized, since principals didn't work in cubicles, and sat down in a daze. Timothy appeared moments later with a coffee from the good place downstairs. "I don't know what happened in there," he said quietly, "but the rumor mill is saying you just got promoted and Vanessa is basically done." "The rumor mill is well informed," I said. "Good," Timothy said with surprising vehemence. "I helped you build parts of that model. I watched you work until midnight for weeks. What she did was theft, and I'm glad someone finally called it out." The rest of the day passed in a blur of congratulatory emails from colleagues who somehow already knew about my promotion, and tersely professional messages from Vanessa transferring her files and client notes to me. One email stood out. It was from Vanessa, sent to my personal address rather than my work email. "Sophia, I know an apology is inadequate, but I'm offering one anyway. What I did was wrong. I convinced myself I was just trying to understand your work, then that I was adding value, then that we were collaborating. The truth is I was threatened by how talented you are and wanted credit I didn't earn. You handled this with more grace than I deserved. I hope someday you can forgive me, though I'll understand if you can't. Vanessa." I read it 3 times, looking for hidden barbs or self-serving justifications. It seemed genuine, but then again, Vanessa had always been good at seeming genuine. I didn't respond. Forgiveness might come eventually, but it wasn't something I owed her on her timeline. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline autumn weather that makes you remember why people tolerate New York's rent prices. I wore my interview suit, the theory one, now upgraded with the knowledge that I could actually afford the non-sale items. The Westridge team arrived at 9 a.m. sharp. Dr. Whitmore, Leslie Park, and James Hendricks, along with 2 new faces, their director of clinical development and their head of investor relations. Harrison handled introductions, this time positioning me as principal and lead strategist on your account. Dr. Whitmore's eyebrows rose slightly. I thought Vanessa was leading the implementation. "Personnel changes," Harrison said smoothly. "Sophia built your forecast model and will be your primary point of contact going forward. You'll find she has considerably deeper expertise in the methodology." "The person who actually built it?" Leslie Park looked genuinely pleased. "Even better. No offense to Vanessa, but I prefer working directly with the architect rather than the spokesperson." The meeting ran for 3 hours. I walked them through not just what the model projected, but why, the underlying assumptions, the sensitivity analyses, the scenarios where the forecast might need recalibration. Dr. Whitmore asked increasingly complex questions, clearly testing my knowledge. I answered each one without hesitation, often pulling up the actual model code to show him exactly how specific calculations worked. "This is remarkable," he said finally. "Most consultants give us black box outputs and expect us to trust the magic. You're showing us how the watch works. You're paying for strategic insight, not smoke and mirrors," I said. "If you don't understand the methodology, you can't make informed decisions when the model's projections diverge from your expectations." James Hendricks, who'd been taking notes throughout, looked up. "We're going to be presenting this to our board in 2 weeks. Would you be willing to join us for that presentation? They're going to have questions, and I'd prefer to have the actual expert in the room." I glanced at Harrison, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Absolutely," I said. "I'd be happy to support your board presentation." The meeting concluded with handshakes and the kind of genuine enthusiasm that meant we'd moved from vendor to trusted partner in the client's mind. After they left, Harrison pulled me aside. "Their board presentation is at the Four Seasons. Private equity investors, institutional shareholders, the works. This is a significant opportunity." "I understand." "I don't think you do," Harrison said. "Whitmore is positioning you as their strategic advisor, not just our firm. If you perform well at that board meeting, they'll want you personally on retainer. That's how principal-to-partner trajectories accelerate." Partner, the word I'd barely allowed myself to think about, suddenly present in a sentence about my career trajectory. The next 2 weeks were intense. I refined the model, created a board-level presentation that balanced technical rigor with executive accessibility, and ran practice sessions with Harrison playing the role of skeptical investor. The night before the board presentation, I had dinner with my parents at their restaurant in Queens. My mother took one look at me and insisted I eat more, as though carbohydrates could cure stress. "You look tired, Mija," my father said, his hands worn from decades of kitchen work. "This job, they appreciate you." I thought about how to answer that. 3 weeks ago, the answer would have been no. Now. "They're starting to," I said. My mother brought out a plate of her special flan, the recipe my grandmother had brought from Colombia. "Your abuela always said the truth comes out eventually. Sometimes it just needs help." The Four Seasons Conference Center was exactly as intimidating as expected. All marble and modern art, and the kind of understated luxury that whispered money rather than shouting it. I arrived 30 minutes early, wearing a new suit I'd bought specifically for this presentation, and set up my laptop with the careful attention of someone who knew she had exactly one chance to make this count. Dr. Whitmore arrived shortly after, along with Leslie Park and their board chair, an elegant woman in her 60s named Margaret Holloway, who'd made her fortune in medical devices before becoming a professional board member for biotech companies. "I've heard impressive things about your model," Margaret said as we shook hands. "Graham tells me it's the most sophisticated forecasting he's seen in 30 years in this industry." "It's designed to be as dynamic as the market you're operating in," I replied. "Static projections are fiction. This gives you a tool that evolves with reality." Her eyes sharpened with interest. "Show me." The board filtered in over the next 15 minutes. 12 people total. A mix of private equity investors who'd funded Westridge's Series C, institutional representatives from 2 major healthcare funds, the founders who'd started the company in a university lab 15 years ago, and independent directors with expertise in regulatory affairs and commercial strategy. These were people who'd collectively deployed billions of dollars across the pharmaceutical sector. They'd seen every pitch, every projection, every overpromising consultant who'd ever claimed their model was different. I'd never been more nervous or more prepared in my life. Dr. Whitmore handled the introduction, positioning the forecast as a critical tool for their upcoming fundraising round and commercialization strategy. Then he turned the room over to me. I started with the outcome. "This model projects $2.8 billion in revenue for your lead immunotherapy drug by year 5 post-launch, with a confidence interval of 94% and a margin of error of plus or minus 3.2%. But the projection itself is less important than the methodology, because the methodology is what will help you make decisions when reality inevitably diverges from any forecast." I walked them through the architecture. The adaptive algorithms that recalibrated based on real-time data, the Monte Carlo simulations that stress-tested thousands of scenarios, the regulatory probability trees that accounted for approval timeline variations. One of the private equity investors, a sharp-eyed man named Thomas Kowalski, interrupted. "I've seen Monte Carlo simulations before. They're typically garbage-in, garbage-out exercises that provide false precision. Why should we trust yours?" "Perfect," the skeptical investor giving me exactly the opening I needed. "Because I'm not asking you to trust it," I said. "I'm showing you how to interrogate it." I pulled up the actual model code on the screen, showing them the data sources feeding each variable. Every assumption is transparent and testable. Regulatory timeline probabilities are based on FDA approval data for comparable immunotherapy drugs from the past 7 years. Pricing assumptions incorporate current insurance reimbursement negotiations for similar drugs. Market penetration curves are modeled on actual prescription data from competing therapies. I clicked through to the sensitivity analysis. And here's where you can see exactly which variables have the most impact on the projection. If you disagree with any of my assumptions, you can adjust them and watch the entire forecast recalculate in real time. I changed one variable, reducing the assumed insurance reimbursement rate by 10%, and the entire model recalculated instantly, showing the cascading impact on revenue, market penetration, and timeline to profitability. "Everything is connected," I continued, "which means the model behaves like an ecosystem, not a spreadsheet. That's what creates genuine predictive value. Thomas leaned back, his skepticism replaced by what looked like respect. How often does this recalibrate? Currently, weekly, I said, but it could be daily if you want to integrate real-time data feeds. The infrastructure is designed to be as responsive as you need it to be. Margaret Holloway raised her hand. Talk to me about the international projections. That's where most forecasts fall apart because they just multiply US numbers by some arbitrary factor and call it a global strategy. I'd been hoping someone would ask about this. The section Vanessa had added, which I'd spent the past 2 weeks rigorously stress testing and improving. The international model uses the same adaptive methodology, but accounts for region-specific regulatory environments, pricing structures, and competitive landscapes. I explained. European markets have different reimbursement frameworks than the US, and emerging markets have different price sensitivity curves. The model treats each major market as its own ecosystem, while accounting for how regulatory decisions in one region influence timelines in others. I pulled up the European projection. For example, EMA approval using their Adaptive Pathways program for breakthrough therapies can actually happen before or concurrent with FDA approval. The model accounts for that and adjusts US launch strategy accordingly if European data comes in stronger or weaker than expected. One of the founders, a quiet scientist named Dr. Amy Zhao, spoke up for the first time. Can this model integrate clinical trial data as it comes in? We're running 3 concurrent phase III trials, and the data will be reported out over the next 18 months. Absolutely, I said. The model can ingest trial data and recalculate efficacy assumptions, safety profiles, and likely regulatory responses. It's specifically designed to help you make go/no-go decisions at each trial milestone based on updated projections. The questions continued for 90 minutes. I fielded inquiries about everything from competitor drug pipelines to social media sentiment analysis to how the model accounted for potential generic competition 5 years out. I answered every single question with specificity and confidence, not because I'd memorized talking points, but because I genuinely understood every element of what I'd built. Finally, Margaret called for a break. The board members filed out to the coffee service, and Dr. Whitmore approached me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "That was extraordinary," he said quietly. "I've been in this business for 3 decades, and I've never seen a consultant command a room like that. You didn't just present data, you taught them how to think about our strategy." Leslie Park joined us, her phone in hand. "I just got a text from Margaret. The board wants to discuss bringing you on as a formal advisor to the company, separate from your firm's consulting engagement." My heart stuttered. What does that mean exactly? "It means equity, a seat at strategic planning sessions, and a formal role in our fundraising process," Leslie said. "You've built something remarkable, and we want to make sure you're invested in our success beyond a single project." Dr. Whitmore nodded. "We'll need to work out the arrangement with your firm, but Harrison and I have already had preliminary conversations." He indicated Brennan and Cole would be supportive of an individual advisory role that complements the institutional engagement. This was happening. The opportunity Harrison had hinted at, materializing faster than I'd imagined possible. "I'd be honored," I managed. The board reconvened, and Dr. Whitmore presented their fundraising strategy, with my forecast model as the centerpiece of their Series D pitch. The private equity investors asked detailed questions about valuation, which Dr. Whitmore fielded with references back to specific elements of my model. By the time the meeting concluded, there was clear consensus that Westridge was positioned for a successful raise that would fund them through drug launch and beyond. Margaret approached me as people were packing up. "I sit on 4 biotech boards," she said. "I'm going to be recommending you to the other 3. The kind of analytical rigor you've demonstrated is exceptionally rare." "Thank you," I said, my professional composure barely containing my internal screaming. Some things didn't change, even when everything else did. Family dinners in Queens, my mother's insistence that I needed to eat more, my father's quiet pride that needed no words. That evening, I had dinner with Margaret at a restaurant where the menu didn't list prices, always a concerning sign, but one I could now afford without panic. She'd asked me to consult on a potential investment in a diagnostics company, and the conversation ranged from technical due diligence to industry gossip. "I heard Vanessa landed somewhere," Margaret said casually over dessert. "She did," I confirmed. "Smaller firm, fresh start." "Do you think she learned anything?" I considered the question. I think she learned that shortcuts have consequences. Whether she internalized why those consequences matter is harder to say. Margaret nodded. "The industry is small. She'll either rebuild her reputation through actual merit or she'll flame out. Either way, it's not your problem anymore." She was right. Vanessa's story had intersected with mine, created crisis and resolution, and then diverged. I could wish her well without needing to be invested in her outcome. "To indispensable women," Margaret said, raising her wine glass. I raised mine to meet it. To indispensable women. The forecast model that started everything is still running, still recalibrating every week as new data flows in. Westridge's drug received FDA approval 8 months ago, and early market performance is tracking within 2.1% of my original projection, well within the confidence interval. I'm still a partner at Brennan & Cole, still taking on clients who need sophisticated forecasting, still teaching analysts that visibility and credit are things you build, not things you wait to receive. And sometimes, late at night when I'm reviewing models or preparing for board presentations, I think about that moment in the conference room when Harrison asked, "Who built this model?" The silence before Timothy checked the file. The pause before he said my name. The choice I made afterward to document, to speak up, to trust that evidence might matter. That moment changed everything, not because it was dramatic, but because it was definitive. It was the moment I stopped being invisible and started being indispensable. The work was always excellent. I just had to make sure the right people knew it was mine. Stories like these remind us that professional integrity isn't a weakness. It's a strategic advantage that compounds over time. If that resonates with the career you're building, the subscribe button is right there. We're on our way to 8,000 subscribers, and this community grows stronger with every person who believes merit should matter more than politics. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.